Well, we might make a start. Thank you, everybody, for coming to day 2 of Degrowth Week. We've got another 3 days to go. Tomorrow we've got 3 sessions. Thursday there's 2 sessions, and Friday is the big round table. I always like to start with welcome to country. I think it sets the scene in a really grounding kind of way. So I'm just going to share my screen. But before I do that, I'm Tonye. My pronouns are they, them. And if you would like to write your name in the chat, or just write in the chat the country that you're from, the land that you're from, if you're in Australia or internationally, that would be really good. It seems like a nice thing to do. Yeah. So I'm just going to share my screen. So I'd just like to acknowledge the Indigenous land that I'm on. I'm on Woiwurrung country, which is right down here. I don't know, can everybody see my cursor? Right down here, southern point in the state of Victoria. And I'd just like to acknowledge the elders and all of the knowledge that they have accumulated from 65,000 years of knowledge, and that we are so new to this land. so new. And I'm also paying my respect to not only the elders, but also to the younger generation of Indigenous people who will follow in their footsteps. And with that, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on stolen land, and that sovereignty was never ceded. We have so much to learn, and I think we need to move forward together, and we have so much to learn as my people being Eurocentric white origins. So thank you for that. I've just lost my mouse temporarily. Oh, there we go. I'm a little bit new to all this, so bear with me. So I would just like to let you know of these other events that are happening, the guests that we have speaking quickly. There's the list on the left there, if everybody can see it. Degrowth Week, 10th to the 14th of July. And let's see, how do we do the next one? Okay, great. And just a reminder of setting the scene here of what degrowth refers to and why we need it. And why it's important. So degrowth refers to a set of theories and a powerful growing social and economic movement that critique the paradigm of endless economic growth. Endless economic growth is not possible on this beautiful finite planet that we have. So the idea of growth is that wealthy economies should move past the growth of GDP, gross domestic product, as our society's goal. We need to scale down destructive and unnecessary forms of production to reduce energy and material use and focus economic activity on securing human needs within the boundaries of bioregional, where are we? And planetary ecological well-being. Degrowth is a purposeful strategy to create localized, socially just and ecologically centered societies and economies. So there you go. There's a bit of a list of everything happening this week. Anyway, we'll put in a link to the NENA, the Humanitics ticketing event. So you can see all of these and what time they're on and who's presenting, etc. So about the Degrowth Network Australia, the Degrowth Network is a place for people who want to or are already acting, organising and campaigning for a degrowth world. We gather locally and nationally online every month or so to learn from each other, share updates and discuss plans and projects. The gatherings are dynamic and open, and we make them what we want to and encourage everyone equally to jump in with your ideas and make things happen. So please jump in. Please contact us. It's a lot of fun, and yeah, we really want this to grow. We want growth there. And there we go. And then just a bit of an idea of what NENA is about. So this whole week is a collaboration between the Degrowth Network and NENA, the New Economy Network of Australia. NENA is a network of organisations and individuals working to create an ecologically healthy and socially just society by transforming Australia's economic system. NENA works by providing a platform for knowledge, sharing, peer-to-peer support, cross-pollination of ideas and collaboration. We host hubs like the Degrowth Hub that bring their ideas and knowledge into the wider network. Get in touch with us. Get in touch with NENA. There's the website and there's the email. And here's a bee. Here. All right. I'm going to stop the share. And everybody's back. Yay. It's working. I'm making this work. So the structure, just to let you know, we've got Boon, Breyne. Did I get that right? Yeah, yeah. Boon's nodding.
That was splendid, Tonya.
I'm glad. And then we have Joslin, Faith, Kehdy, who are both presenting their stories today. Very interesting stories from both of them. I'm really looking forward to hearing what they have to say. So I'm going to shut up and we'll start. I'll just read Boon's biography for you all. Boon is an intern on new economies at Friends of the Earth Europe and climate justice activist with Fridays for Future. Born in Ypres, Belgium. I think I said that right. Grew up as a car enthusiast, studied automotive engineering to become a test driver and electric vehicle expert, but turned away from that world with an intense feeling of betrayal. He now aims to help unravel the greatest challenge of human society has ever faced. No kidding. By focusing on mobilisation as a whole and on the underlying values of our socio-economic system. So on that note, Boon's going to share his story first. So welcome, Boon, and thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'm really glad that I could be here. It's really special to be calling in from Brussels, Belgium. Well, you are all around the globe. Well, most of you are in Australia, I understood. Yeah, I'm really glad to talk about the strong momentum that we see here in Europe when it comes to the degrowth movement. There's so much happening that we can dive into. I'm sure that we won't have the time to do all of that, but there has been a major conference in the middle of May, just 2 months ago, called the Beyond Growth Conference, organized by the European Parliament. Just before that conference, there was actually like a pre-conference organized by the European Trade Union Association. So they are very much involved as well. There are new movements popping up, new grassroots movements. There's huge grants being given to degrowth academics to do new research there and search for a way out of basically an impossible conundrum that we're facing right now. And there's more and more politicians, there's activists, there's prominent scientists speaking out about the impossibility of combining growthism and a sustainable future. So there's a lot to talk about. And I'm also happy to share more about my personal story.
Great, thanks, Brian.
Right. Shall I dive first into that?
Yeah, go for it. Just, yep.
All right. Yeah, there's yeah, there's a big question mark always when I introduce myself as an automotive engineer. It's not really the typical profile that you'd find around here in the NGO bubble. But the reason is that as I was at university and I was learning about automotive technology, there was also a part of me that was just interested in electric mobility as a technology. And in those classes, I was happy to have one professor. It always starts with one professor, doesn't it? One professor in Austria. And he was courageous enough to look beyond the scope of his own field of study. And he started to show these graphs that compare really measured air quality compared to the automotive pollution legislation in the European Union. And you could see that legislation was getting ever more stringent, but it didn't change air pollution at all. Okay, so there was clearly something wrong over there. And so that kind of started me diving into what the exact processes were that that are behind this. Got myself into legislation, got myself into climate science, and before you know, you're sitting at your desk instead of working, reading IPCC reports. And that was really the start of a period of intense cognitive dissonance, which means cognitive dissonance basically means that you're doing one thing, but at the same time, you know that what you're doing is not really in line with your values. So there's like this dissonance just as you'd have in music, and your brain is going to look for harmony. So it's going to try to explain for yourself why what you're doing is still in line with your values. And so for me, in my first year working in the automotive industry, I was a test driver for sports cars, really polluting sports cars. And my brain insisted that that was kind of okay. I was already very worried about ongoing droughts in Belgium, like farmers not being able to grow their crops without additional water being sustained to them. But I was like, yeah, but you know, the cars that I'm working on, only 500 of them will be built. Like it's a really exclusive tier of cars, and those people who will buy it, they will stall those cars in garages. So, I mean, they won't even be driven that much at all. And on top of that, I insisted to go to the company by train, which also meant that I insisted to go to the test track by train. So there's really weird ways of how our human brain tries to find excuses, or at least try to find that cognitive harmony, as long as we don't dare to look at ourselves in a very honest or conscious way. And obviously that had to explode at some point. And when there were a bit more, let's say, changes in my life, a bit more things that kind of kicked me out of this routine, I was able to address that more consciously, and I quit my job. After some period of intense activism, I started to work here at Friends of the Earth Europe on degrowth. And it's a lot more valuable to be able to come to your office and to work on the things that are absolutely in line with your values, and also to debunk the lies that you're fed since university, and the lies that you've been fed, saying that, you know, maybe if we invent an engine, a combustion engine that would be 2% more efficient, then we can do something about the quality of the world. And it's that kind of keeping people busy keeping people's energy busy, keeping people's brains busy with things that don't matter, that really are an emotional motivation for me.
So you mentioned the cognitive dissonance. How do you deal with the cognitive dissonance on a sort of a day-to-day level? Like, because I mean, like many of you, you probably experience this as well, is that you're forced to sort of participate in, this kind of fossil fuel fed economy, and you can't sort of really remove yourself from it without kind of becoming a hermit. So how do you sort of, what's the balance there? What goes on inside your head? How do you sort of move through that, and without it sort of almost paralyzing you so that you stop doing anything?
Yeah, I think it starts with trying to look into yourself, look into yourself, whether you're being honest with yourself, like try to be self-critical, of course, not to a point where you're being this pessimist that kind of ruins it for yourself as well. And it helps a lot by talking about it, because talking about it means that you need to express whatever you're thinking in terms of sentences, in terms of words, and that helps a lot. But what also really made a lot of progress for me was to dive more into these psychological barriers. So there's this really important research that I came across, which was from an American psychologist called Robert Griffith. And basically what he did was have a look at this immense list of psychological barriers, that everyone has, and try to categorize them into the 7 most important factors that everyone faces when it comes to climate action in particular. And so that was really interesting to kind of study that, have that in my head, and to be able to identify them as you go along, not just for yourself, but also people people that you meet, people that you talk to. Yeah.
Can you tell us what they are?
Sure. Well, actually, no, because I don't remember all 7 of them.
So for anybody who doesn't know, like Boon has given a TED talk about this called the 7 Dragons of, what was it called again?
The 7 Dragons of Inaction, exactly.
That's right. Inaction on climate change. Yeah, it was very interesting and helpful.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the most important ones of them are like trying to focus on, for instance, how you compare yourself to others. That's one of them. Seeing that, for instance, and this is very real, like what I see, for instance, German activists or just European activists in general, like they're very conscious of the problems out there, but there's this trend of like visiting Australia or Latin America or South Asia, and then it's kind of nullifying what they did in the first place as an activist. And so you see how the social comparison just being this trend of like, oh, that's just something you do as a young person, is driving yourself to doing that without really standing still, whether that's really something that's going to make such a big difference in your life. That's now quite a bold statement I'm putting out there, but that's that's the way I think about it. One other really important thing for me is like this idea of commitments and investments that you already made. For me, for instance, it was incredibly difficult to say, okay, I'm going to quit the automotive industry. I mean, everything I did since I was a little child, all the games I played, all the knowledge I gathered, all the degrees I got, everything was centered around automotive technology and engineering. Like that was the world I knew, and that was the world that also gave me success at work because I knew it by heart. And to quit this meant that I also had to leave a lot of investment behind. So that's also a very important psychological barrier to get to. And maybe to hop into a last one, I think more general, the problems we're facing is also something that our brain is not really used to face with. Like, you know, there's the way that our brains developed is really on reacting to things that are really close, reacting to things that are visible, reacting to things that are kind of abrupt and quick. And, you know, climate change, like nothing like that. Biodiversity collapses, nothing like that. Like, it's not really that you suddenly see a bunch of birds dying and you're like, oh shit, we need to do something about that. That's not how it works. So there's a lot of things happening that our brains are not really used to. And there's plenty of books being written about this. So I'm not going to say that I'm the expert about that, but just having like these different psychological barriers, and indeed maybe go watch my TED talk to hear about the other 4 of them. Being conscious about them really helps me to go forward in my activism and in my work. Absolutely.
Yeah, all right. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. What was I going to say? Yeah, we're not really adapted as like living beings to deal with these such broad, complex, long-term issues. We're sort of evolved really to deal with survival in the immediate future, in a sense. But we need to be better at that, though, and deal with that and become more practiced at it, I think. And yeah, I don't think we can grapple with everything. You have to just kind of do what you can do, learn as much as you can about it, and keep pushing forward and confronting things in yourself and talking with people, as you say. It's yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the baseline. I mean, the psychological biases are there because they are inevitable. And we need to realize that everyone we talk to, everyone that we interact with has these psychological biases. And it takes energy, capacity, and to address them, to know that they're there, to be conscious about them. So for me, it was also a very strong sign, just only seeing myself in the past. Like, I think about this a lot when I hear to other people who are like opposed to the ideas that I'm opposed to. I think of myself in the past, and I think, like, you know, when if you had talked to me 10 years ago about environmental legislation, I would laugh in your face, like, what are you, some sort of tree hugger? Go away. and I realized that it's not, it makes absolutely no sense to attack people if you kind of want to convince them or change their ideas. Like, it's the ideas that live in those people that really matter. And everyone can change.
Mm-hmm. So did you? I'm just sort of taking a totally different tangent here and just throwing in something, because I think I think it would be great for the audience to hear what you're doing there at Friends of the Earth, in their post-growth department. I always forget the name of the department that you're in, but and how long you've been doing that, and you've recently attended the European Commission, is that right? The post-growth conference. It would be really good to hear. Did you go to that?
Yes, so here, Friends of the Earth Europe, I'll be honest with you, our resource justice and new economies team, as I call is pretty small. So we're 2 campaigners now, and I must say half of our director time is also going a lot into these efforts, which again underlines the importance of this idea within the NGO world at the moment. And what we always do is, like, we team up with other NGOs, and so in a team of 6, we've played quite a big role in the Beyond Growth conference at the European Parliament. So we attended that indeed, and we saw from the first row like how powerful, how significant of an event that was. And I don't even need to speak from my own experience. Like, this is something that speaks from the numbers and the facts itself, but also speaks from the reaction of like experienced degrowth academics and advocates. So for instance, I mean, it was quite exceptional that the hemicycle of the European Parliament was actually used for 3 days for a conference. And it eventually saw 2,500 people attending in person and another 5,000 attending the event virtually online. And it's by far the largest event that the European Parliament has seen in the past 5 years. So that's quite something. It's really about, let's be honest, about an anti-capitalist, about an anti-liberal idea. So this is very powerful, and we saw really important people within the European Union as well. So our Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, was present, and she gave a speech in the opening plenary, which, I mean, you have to give it to her that she was there in the first place, but you also realize she's speaking for an institution, and she's speaking as the member of a center-right conservative party. And still, she went onto that stage and say, like, you know, she didn't say that growth was obsolete, but at least she said that fossil fuel growth models were obsolete. So that's quite a strong statement. She went out to acknowledge that economic growth is not an ends, but is a mean to an ends. She went on to acknowledge that indeed GDP does not measure what we actually want to attain, that it measures everything except that which makes life worthwhile. And so these are extremely strong statements for a person in the position that she is in. There was also the president of the European Parliament that was there, so Roberta Metsola. Who was not there, however, was Charles Michel, so the president of the European Council. For those who are not super familiar with the European Union, these are like the 3 presidents of the European Union. So without really having one head of state, there's the head of the European Commission, von der Leyen, the head of the Parliament, Roberta Metsola, and head of the Council, being Charles Michel. And so 2 of them were there. And actually, what was also extremely interesting to see was that the conference itself, was organized by 5 different political groups. So this wasn't just something organized by the extreme left. It was something that saw 20 members of parliament from the left, the socialists, the center-right, the liberals, and the Greens, really teaming up together with even a few members of parliament from non-affiliated groups to organize this conference. So there's a clear interest, probably not just from the corner of, okay, there's an ecological catastrophe going on, how can we address it? But also from the corner of, we see that it's really difficult to attain our growth objectives. How can we prepare for a future where that's not possible anymore?
Right. Sorry, go on.
So yeah, I'm going to finish maybe.
Yeah. Well,
hinging on to the reaction of the other academics and advocates that are there. So you asked me how long have I been working in Friends of the Earth Europe? Since February. So this is like 5 months that I'm really in the NGO bubble right there. I've been an activist since 2 years now, but most of this role is fairly new to me still. So the way I kind of rate how good a conference is by looking at people who've been around there for a way longer time. And you could see that actually the people who started the degrowth movement in France over 20 years ago, back when it was still called décroissance, and it didn't even have an English translation yet, those people were also there, and they were crying their eyes out. They were seeing how much of a difference this event made.
Wow.
And so for me, that's a big event. Yeah.
wanted to ask you that, like, what was the feeling in a sense there? Like, it obviously felt quite of a big milestone that was crossed in a way, just to get that amount of diverse representation from different political parties, like in the room at the same time talking about that subject. That's a massive achievement to even be in, like, thinking about the idea of, well, this growth thing is not working, so what are we going to do? Like, that's a big thing to have the Western political world sort of thinking about that. How many? I mean, I want to move on to Joslin really soon, but I'm just really keen to sort of hear what your experience there was, because you're there. You went to the conference. Most of us, obviously, perhaps all of us, weren't there. So that's kind of just really useful for us to gauge, like, what the feeling was. Do you feel like the representatives who were there were, perhaps kind of had this, how difficult is their job going to be to go back to their countries and then bring other people along that journey, those kinds of things. Was there a sense that was, were you in those kinds of conversations, or were you hearing that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think if the question was whether growth can still continue, whether it's compatible with the ecological crises that we're facing today, that conference gave an extremely clear answer to that. So many experts from different angles approached that issue and said, like, this is an impossible thing to do, and like, this scientific evidence is there, full stop. What was less addressed is, okay, how do we get there? How do we move on? So we know it's possible, but how do we create that change? And so for me, establishing that it's possible to realize a good future for all, to realize well-being for all within planetary boundaries, that was extremely important. How to move on, of course, wasn't addressed as clearly, but you saw that triggered, that energized a lot of the attendance over there. So it was actually the trade union conference half a year before that triggered already 2 new grassroots movements in Belgium. So one of them more focused on really non-violent direct action. So they are going to conferences that promote growth and really disturb them and say, like, try to kick them out of this cognitive dissonance, saying that, it's impossible, just be honest with yourself, move on from the idea. And then there's another group called for now it's called the Degrowth Propaganda Squad. They're still figuring out a better name. But collecting the material and, like, really vulgarizing the scientific evidence that's there, and trying to spread that message into a way that's a lot more palpable for a lot more people than just MEPs and just ministries and academics. So that's extremely interesting, and you felt that energy in the conference. I think even movements got born into that room. And it will be very difficult for member of parliaments, for politicians to go back into their cabinets and into their parties. But the same energy also triggered the idea very much of creating a similar conference on national level. So for instance, Austria will host their own Beyond Growth conference in May 2024. And kind of repeat that effort, repeat those big numbers, and, like, try to get these different political groups together so it can be implemented on all levels at the same time. Yeah.
Thank you, Boon. That's great. Great to hear all that. Hopefully people are having lots of questions to ask you about that conference and your experience there. But we'll have a nice dialogue later. I wanted to move on to Joslin. And so I heard about Joslin first in an interview that Joslin did with Nate Hagens on The Great Simplification, and I was completely blown away by Joslin's amazing activism and forward thinking, and just what she's activating in Lebanon is quite incredible. And you'll hear about this as we move through. But I wanted to read Joslin's biography. This is really fantastic. So Joslin is a devoted steward of the environment, living off-grid in the village of Baskinta. I think I'm saying that right. She is a hands-on unlearner and actively seeks out nature-based alternatives. She studied Mandarin Chinese in Guangzhou, managed operations of a design-build architectural engineering firm in Hawaii, and organised food and travel conferences and tours between England and Lebanon prior to unpacking nature-based consumption and production alternatives. Joslin's work has been instrumental in empowering individuals and communities to adopt circular practices and shift our collective role in consumption and production, promoting holistic system change. The waste crisis was the last plastic straw in a crippling state where water, electricity, air quality, and basic rights dance in complacent corruption. With the ongoing challenges faced in Lebanon serving as a microcosm of the larger systemic ecological collapse facing the world, Joslin is driven to develop tools that empower interconnected action for communities and provide long-term solutions through creative ecology. She co-published a journal on cultivating circular economies in the gaps of governance, lessons from Lebanon's ecosystem of circular economy micro-projects, with Rachel Rosenbaum, published in Local Environment, the International Journal of Justice and Sustainability. Most recently, Joslin was selected as an Echoing Green finalist, a fellowship for transformative leaders with bold ideas for solving the world's most pressing challenges, creating brighter and more equitable future. I just wanted to read a brief few sentences that Nate Hagens put together about Joslin's work. So Recycle Lebanon, which was started by Joslin, is a trailblazing Lebanese NGO advocating for system change towards regenerative and circular development. It operates through 4 main programs: a circular economy data platform known as regeneratehub.org, which seeks to strengthen nature-based solutions, and EcoSouk, the first zero waste shop in the West African North. Oh gosh, I won't attempt to remember that acronym. Sorry. In the Wana region, with access to local, traditional, refillable, unpackaged, bulk and toxic-free products. Pteropods, a biodesign makerspace, art residency and agroecology farm in Baskinta, Lebanon. And Dive into Action, a policy and empowerment program with zero waste cleanups, Bala plastic, which is plastic-free transitions, food waste events, and native planting initiatives. And I've just realised that that's not the thing that Nate Hagen said about Joslin, but I will read that out very shortly. Or maybe I'll save it for later. So Joslin Kehdy is a change maker and a citizen of Lebanon. Over the last 3 years, Lebanon has had a 50% drop in GDP and 98% devaluation in their currency, massive unemployment, and among many other things, an ongoing waste crisis. Throughout this, Joslin has been a leader in responding to and coming up with new and old ways for living a dignified and simplified life. Joslin is an environmentalist currently living the Great Simplification. She offers a valuable perspective on what sustainable living really means and insights for what may come to the rest of the world. So, welcome, Joslin.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much for this wonderful introduction and for inviting me to be part of this network. I have to say, from listening to Boon, I'm so very jealous that you have an operating government to have such parliamentary sessions. We currently don't even have a president, and we have a caretaker government. So to, again, be living the great simplification, it is always inspiring to see perhaps the motivation that you felt in the conference, but also from where we are, the most corrupt country in politics, we also know that very little could happen from such conferences. So it's up to placing the action from what will come out of all of these great networks coming together. And so welcome to Lebanon. We are a case study for system failure. And unfortunately, I'm saying that with a smile. It's just a mask. And what we have here in Lebanon is really an opportunity to try to design out a system change. And obviously that can't be done with one ideal or with one group of persons. It needs to be something that is echoed loudly and having a large effect. So while we have 18 different religious sects and everyone having their own ideals and interpretations, you can imagine that's quite difficult to sit down at a table. And this is where the waste crisis kind of fell into my, as you will say, cognitive dissonance viewpoint. It came under the, you had to smell it, yeah? You couldn't go away from it. It was everywhere. And at some point, I saw a video of the waste crisis with some women on a balcony filming it. And they were just on the balcony filming all of the waste just running down the street that didn't have good draining, and laughing because this was the cognitive dissonance moment for them. And I thought, well, I've got to do something. I mean, I can't do nothing. And I had a real big moment in myself where I thought, wow, well, this is the first time I had taken time to start to be with myself, to go deep into myself. And now I'm thinking to go and take care of something else and create a project. And I thought, how do I do both? So 7 years later, I didn't do both. I put my whole life and effort into Recycle Lebanon. And I feel that maybe just right now in these last two years or so, I've been able to have a time between the organization and myself. So I named the NGO Recycle Lebanon as a pun, not to recycle garbage. We don't recycle garbage. I don't believe in recycling garbage. It's to recycle the system and to create these alternative forms for system change. So as Tonya gave a great introduction, what really had happened is I'm not an expert at all in this domain. Just as Boon, sometimes this just falls into your lap, or you understand where is your path and where is your calling, because you're not able to do something else. To wake you up in the morning, you know that you have to do something that is requiring your action. And so this is where I created the 4 programs. And it's interesting for me because none of them can really bring about a system change on their own. So yes, while we started to do cleanups, it was never about doing a cleanup. It was about doing a brand audit and about introducing sorting and recycling at source, and about placing the responsibility on the producers, not on the consumers. So I was not very interested in going to schools and telling 5-year-olds or 25-year-olds that they need to recycle. I felt this was something absolutely absurd, that we're having to take on the responsibility while the fossil fuel conglomerates are continuously propagating our demise. And at the same time, we developed the eco souk, which is the zero waste shop. And that did help me sleep a little bit because it's a access to nature-based alternatives. We have over 150 local producers where we have a refill bar, so you can access your shampoos and laundry detergents, general household cleaners, liquid soaps, pottery, lifestyle beauty products, sustainable clothing, etc. But for me, it was always about going a step deeper. And that is what we are doing with the pteropods. So the pteropods, and I believe now Tonez just placed a link to it, is the program that we're working on currently here in Baskinta. So Baskinta is about 45 kilometers from Beirut. It's a village in Aramaic. It means serenity, Beit Shkin, so the house of serenity. And I have to say, I feel very serene anytime I'm here. And what I can say is that I really feel that we can have so many movements around the world, but we have to have these movements that also combine and come together and create an action. And while we have these programs in our organization, without pteropods actualizing, we don't have a physical model where we can create the alternatives and have a safe space for others to come and co-create. It's not about saying that we have a solution. It's about saying we have a problem and how can we come together and create an alternative for this problem. So pteropods is a 150 meter square building that we are trying to equip now. It's a biodesign makerspace, a commercial kitchen, market kitchen with an eco souk as well, and a residency space so that we can offer residency to artists, scientists, researchers, and the curious at play. So we have a capacity of about 12 persons, and what we really are trying to achieve here is to bring together very scientific research, hands on the ground, with the creative, artistic performance, kind of vocal perspectives of how can you create alternatives while using an agroecological garden that we are growing as a food forest and a farm to kind of combine as a very immersive bridge between what can you grow and create from the land without exploitation of the person or the planet to create these alternatives. And again, we don't say we have the answers. It's about how can we ask the right questions and how can we experiment for them. And I think this is really key because when you're facing such a massive collapse in Lebanon, every McKinsey report is coming and telling you what's this new alternative that's coming from a Western perspective. And we really want to look at how are the problems we are facing in Lebanon, how are they faced globally, and how can we design out this waste as a psychological perspective, as a psychological concept. So this is where we're at. And we are currently fundraising now to equip the space with solar power and to make like the facility have a better recycled water recollection and for the low-tech equipment. And where can I say where we're at? So this land, it's named Khraybe. And in Arabic, it's basically like, you know, something that's impossible. And all the villagers constantly come to my home and they're like, what are you doing there? You know, couldn't you have chosen a better land? Don't you know your ancestors have abandoned this land over 50 years ago? And I don't drive, I don't have a car. So I walk up every morning at 6 a.m. up a mountain for an hour, get to the land, and I work 8 hours. And they're just looking at me. You know, the shepherd comes and he goes, are you absolutely crazy? What are you doing here? And I said, you know, my grandfather used to do this. Why can't I? And he goes, well, that's why they abandoned these lands after your grandfather. This is why you're all the future generations have stopped farming these lands. So when I arrived, I had to find the stairs, I had to find the ditch, I had to find the terraces because it was completely overgrown. So I'm so very proud to say that we finally cleaned it, cleared it, planted it, and as a testament to system change, the terrace that most people will see when they first enter, I planted it with the first heirloom seeds is called Jabaliyat al-Hub, which is a mountain of love. And I planted next to that Palestinian black-eyed peas with some cayenne red pepper, which is about the passion and the fire that's also between, the genocide taking place in the apartheid of Palestine. And then next to it, I planted the tomato of Crimea, and 5 meters from that, the tomato of Harani from Syria, to just see, how can this power of love really push through. If you want to make a system change, I think it starts on the ground. And if you can start with our food system, we're starting somewhere. And if we can have these stories and dialogues and conversations outside of just publications and research documents, where can we go from there? So maybe I like to put a little pun in things as part of trying to cope in this society. But yeah, I'm really excited for this. We have just finished restoring the stone walls and finding the natural springs and restoring them. So it has been a real big labor of love. And yeah, I'm really excited for where we are going with the pteropods. And our final project is Regenerate Hub. So regenerate, we all know what it means, but hub in Arabic is love. So it's also a play on words for network. So Regenerate Hub is a circular economy platform that we've developed. And it's about accessing open source data and having this ability again to come together and co-create. What we have done, against all odds and against a lot of shaming from high leading officials that have said, are you absolutely crazy? You can't take all of this data and make it completely open source. I mean, what if Israel gets their hands on this? I said, do you think Israel doesn't have their hands on this? They absolutely do have access to the data. It's us citizens that don't have access to our data. It's us citizens that can't call for transparency and can't take action because we've got amazing PhD and research documents and publications that are collecting dust inside academic institutions. And we've got information from ministries that just aren't accessible because they're dinosaurs and they don't have anyone to help them transition their information to be digital and available data sources. So what we've done is created a macro to micro filtration system across different sectors. So what's happening in water, energy, waste, agriculture, food, mobility, entrepreneurship, culture, and having a way that you can kind of cross-search the information. Because again, when we look at a complete collapse that we are facing in Lebanon for generations, it's just now that we can't stop looking, we're drowning in the collapse, that you can see the interconnections. Our goal right now is we are upgrading the module to include a more revised material flow so that you can identify what is a material that is being used by one sector or one industry that can then be used by another. So it could be you that logs in and says, okay, I'm an artist and maybe I'm searching for repurposing this material, or I'm a producer and I'm searching for this type of material and I'd like to create an alternative. So we have created a public-private partnership with the Ministry of Industry and the Ministry of Environment to support them as a bridge towards using this application for a national circular economy strategy. What does that mean? It means that we collected about 6,000 data points from the Ministry of Industry of who are our producers, what are they making, and alongside the Ministry of Environment of all of the treatment and operating facilities for solid waste management. We also have our research for all of the artisans and small SME producers in Lebanon. So we're currently running a survey of about 10,000 entities and asking them, first, what are you doing? What do you need? What's the capacity? What are the materials you are using? Where's your materials going to? And trying to identify this material flow so that we can data visualize it. And I'm really glad that we have a team finally to be doing this, because this was a lot of times done on volunteership, which means that it took 7 long years instead of 7 months. And so now we have a very dedicated team. I'm not alone, and it's the power of the people coming together to do this. And I'm very, very proud to kind of be at this next stage where we're able to scale and be joining you in a conference like this to share our story, because we really are going that next step and things are finally materializing in the midst of total collapse.
Thank you so much, Joslin. I think all of us are sitting here in amazement at what you've done. It's truly amazing. You're the definition of resilience, and what we all need right now. And you're able to bring your intelligence and just like love, I think, for what you do, and love for the natural processes, the natural world sounds like a naff way to say it, but the land, your land, the love for that, and it all comes through in what you're creating with your website, Pteropods, Recycle Lebanon. It's just, if I really urge people to look at the website and check it all out. It's everything is just so beautifully done.
We're almost there. I can't wait for the day where I'm on a conference and the next thing I can say is ahla wa sahla, we invite you for a residency. Here's the link to apply. Come and create with mycelium, come and create with seaweed. What can we do with microorganisms? What can we do with potato peels? I really want to reach that next phase, and I know we're just always one step closer to that.
Yeah, you are. It's sounding like you are. I just wondered if you're okay to share a little bit of some of these practical things that are actually happening in Lebanon. That well, I shouldn't say practical, but some of the kind of everyday stuff that you're living with, just so people know what. I mean, you've explained a little bit what you wake up and you trek up the mountain, and it's hard work what you're doing, but there's all these other things that are kind of getting in your way too. Like, I mean, the whole electricity issue is just one of them, and in amongst the whole corrupt system of government there. Can you explain a little bit about, if you're okay to do that?
Well, it happened that I didn't have money in my bank account when this happened, but the government completely froze all of the citizens' monies. So their entire net worths have been completely frozen. Students weren't able to go to universities. We had a total collapse, and it has been, I think, more difficult than living through a civil war for all of the generations here that have been through civil wars. What the government has done with stealing the people's money, blocking them out of their accounts, not giving them access to the funds, to their retirements, to access to their funds. We couldn't even transfer dollars outside of Lebanon in the crisis, because to students that were living abroad, it just was all that you can imagine in a nightmare of a crisis happening at the same time in a gaslit government that can't even be heard or justified or acknowledged, and the person that is doing it is who's being elected next. So you have to really find such strength as a people to come out of this, whether that's trusting your money to be in a bank again, or kind of trusting that you're going to have a meal the next day. So we went from a very affluent country to we have an 80% poverty rate today in Lebanon. And of course, I completely went offline at that time because I had all of my projects to do and I had no courage to at all ask for any support or showcase what our organization is doing, because we're working on something that is very long term, and we have many people that many people, including everyone, it's 80% that no longer have access to food. The bread lines at the bakeries are over, around corners because we're not having access to our wheat. The gas stations had like 1 week long gas waits. You had to park your car there overnight, multiple nights, just to be able to get gas. And then you'd get to the gas line and they'd say, sorry, overcapacity. So I was really glad that I didn't have money in my bank, and that because I just don't have a salary and I just was going day to day trying to run this organization from the start. So it was never that, we had this amount of capital to lose. And then I didn't have a car. So I didn't go through kind of this humiliation that everyone else had to go through. I went through all the others, but not those two, which I think were because, as Tony, you said, you either have to go live a hermit life or, stay grounded in reality. And I did. I went and lived a hermit life. I live in a village and I'm very disconnected. I live off grid, and I found my strength in that only because I'm living a very hermetic life while being very grounded in action. So I probably wouldn't be very fulfilled living in this cave if I wasn't doing the work of the organization at the same time. So there's always like a balanced harmony that comes in between, like having a step away from being in the bustling city of Beirut, where I used to live for 10 years until these last 4 years when I retreated to the village. And it's given me a lot of strength, I have to say. The problems facing Lebanon are, oftentimes they sound like satire, especially because we re-elected them back in. And we're basically running as a service economy of political corruption. So the people are dependent upon the political parties, which were our mafias from the Civil War. And it just, it's really unfortunate how much the society wants to change out of this, but we just kind of keep falling back into these same structures. They're very violent. It's just living under a constant state of chaos. It's a constant state of fear of not knowing, well, is there going to be electric today, or is the cheese that I just got gone bad because there's no power for my fridge to run? So what I'm really trying to do with Terrapods is to make this as a physical model that people can come and see what does it mean to live completely off grid, to have recycled water, to be living on solar system, and not for your house, but for an operation of a makerspace facility where you're using the materials that are grown on the land to create products, to sell them in a marketplace that we already have. So for me, it's not like this big outrageous dream that I can't tackle in the midst of all of these problems happening in Lebanon. Yes, I'm often called outrageous or ambitious or crazy. But for me, those are okay. If I'm not being called that, then I'm not pushing hard enough. I'm not trying to break the limits of what's possible. So because we have the eco souk, we do have a marketplace. So we've removed this middleman in agroecology where we can now grow our own food and sell it directly because we have a marketplace. The same if we create our products, we have a direct marketplace because it's part of the organization structure in building this circular economy system change that we've been trying to do for 7 years. So it requires long-term thinking, and with the Terrapods finally built, all of these like tentacles of how can a system change, I believe will really be physically modeled finally.
Wow. Thanks, Joslin. Thank you so much for just doing such a great job sharing what you're going through and what you have been doing. I just really want to urge people to donate if they can. This is, I think, what Joslin is doing is going to become a model, I think, for other places around the world to follow. It's
like the collapse we're experiencing. It's coming at every neighborhood around the world. It's coming.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
not at your corner. And I just want that, you know, not that we can be this phoenix rising, but that we can be a real tangible example as a nation to say, okay, this is coming. We know it's coming. Why don't we reduce production from fossil fuels by creating products that are nature based from the start? Like we don't need every country to see where Lebanon is reaching.
No, exactly.
We actually don't have the privilege on the planet for that.
No. Great. Well, everybody, just jump on to the website, Recycle Lebanon. I've put the links in earlier in the chat. I'm just about to put in that link there, and there is the fundraiser as well.
Our fundraiser is on sustainlebanon.com.
Sustain Lebanon. I'll put that
Every
link.
donation really helps us. We really want to set up our solar panels. We want to set up this water filtration.
Yeah.
And kind of equip the makerspace.
Well, that's vital for you, really, isn't it? Because you have like maybe an hour of electricity at a random time each day.
Yeah.
You don't know when it's going to come. You don't know when that hour is going to get there. So I mean, you know
when it's not going to come. Never.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just, imagine living with that. I'm just trying to, you know, kind of visualize how that's going to how that would feel. But yeah, the link to donate is there in the chat. Take a look at the website. It really is beautiful. What
so I was going to say that for me to have a link to donate, it took us 2 years because PayPal is not allowed in Lebanon. So I can't even set up a payment gateway system. I had to wait for a second party that had a payment gateway that could create a campaign with us, which is Bank BMO, which is a private bank that we are working with that is very safe. It's the safest bank. We can withdraw all of our money. We have no waiting times. There's no restrictions whatsoever. And we are very lucky to be able to have a bank with them. But until the bank had created this Sustain Lebanon initiative to make change after the crisis for NGOs to get support, it was really difficult to have a payment gateway system. It just, I mean, if you want to buy something on Amazon in Lebanon, you're not allowed. It's not possible to buy something on Amazon. It doesn't work. You can't. And you can't pay anything on PayPal. So just these like micro privileges that you have access to outside are part of our everyday. We're not even going to complain you can't go to Amazon because we want systems outside of Amazon, or you can't use PayPal. But just as an example to show like just the function of consumerism has already been restricted. So it allows you the space to think, okay, well, what are the alternatives? Because I'm not already engulfed with these kind of consumption models, because my model has completely broken anyways from corruption. So kind of collapse does give you a crack to create.
That's very interesting. I bet that's something most of us haven't actually thought about. Like, yeah. I'd like to open this up now for anybody who's got any questions that they'd like to ask. I noticed there's some questions in the chat, I think, but if anybody has anything particular, I have a few questions. Oh, Rog, is that Rog has a question? Great, go for it.
Yeah, to Joslin, that was amazing, as I think most people noticed, and very exciting. I was thinking of comparisons to things going on in the edges of South Africa, and there's a lot of edge in South Africa. I don't know if you have any connections there with yourself. No, but one thing, I'm going to talk to some people about what you're doing. But there's a thing where the Johannesburg Metropolitan Council, like there's huge amounts of corruption, huge amounts of inequality, but there's still wealth somewhere in South Africa for some people. I don't know about Lebanon, but anyway, in some of those gaps, there is some good things that the Johannesburg Metropolitan Council facilitates some of these local resilience collective kind of things. And I guess the question could be, is there any capacity in any government, local or metropolitan, to kind of help support what you're talking about?
Is there capacity for outside governments to support us?
No, other local governments. I mean, I took that you were talking about the national government mostly, but maybe it's just all government is a write-off in Lebanon.
Yeah, it's all one.
Yeah, okay, sure.
It's all one.
Yeah.
Oh. And they're inactive, actually. They're a caretaker government, and we don't have a president at the moment. Which for me, it's the same as when we had a government. When we had a president, it's all dysfunctional. I liked your optimism. Yeah, it doesn't exist.
Just to compare to South Africa, because the majority of what the South African government does is extract from its people and keep the inequality going. But there's just little bits of the ANC old spirit still managed to do little things here and there. But that was
we have some politicians that were part of our academia who have kind of been elected now recently in the last election, and they're in parliament, but they're doing a sit-in for about 170 days now, trying to raise awareness of the corruption, and now that they're in, how corrupt is it really, and what are the decisions? Nothing inspires me more than action, because activism has deterred me. It's like I can saturate myself with activism, but unless there's like a tangible action that's happening, I'm just wailing and crying and saying this is coming, or this is here, what do we do, let's do this. So I feel like my mental capacity is really banking on the pteropods, because I need these physical alternatives. I can't keep just raising awareness.
Yeah. Well, you're beyond activism, really, aren't you? There, I mean, it's survival. Yeah, and that kind of, I think the gap in the privilege is just so incredibly obvious here. Like I think everybody I've shared this story about, about Lebanon's situation, everybody I share that with is just, what? They just they can't. It's just.
And this is all after the government blew up our city of Beirut in the port blast a few years ago, with just systemic collapse.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions about anything? We're almost out of time. So I have a question here from Phoebe. How did you begin to get support for your project creation? Was it first through community outreach meetings?
Okay. I've only received 3 grants. A lot of this is completely bootstrapped, and a lot of this is trying to create system change that doesn't require money, which I did really well until now, when we're doing the pteropods and we need money because we're actually building infrastructure. But we're not going to need money every year going forward in this regard, because we've basically tried to build in a self-sufficient model from the start. So with the Eco Souk, we partnered, there was a volunteer, her name's Nariman, and she is a kind of older activist who really loved what the organization was doing. She wanted to volunteer her time. I said, could you help us fundraise? I've never done it. And we started going on, knocking on doors and sharing the project. And she's like, no one is seeing your vision for 100 years from now. I have a store. Why don't I transition my store to be the eco souk? So without any funds, without any rent money, without any money to pay for the display units, we just transitioned her store and popped up the eco souk now since 2019 there. And so it's not so much about like only community outreach, but it's this like human to human connection of really seeing the dire consequence of, hey, if we don't have a refill bar, everyone's just keeping buying everything in plastic. If we can just set up this, then people will start to see. So a lot of it's just been, how can we go step by step to show a part of what we're trying to do so that we can get that long vision happening. With Regenerate Hub, I'd been doing it on volunteer basis, and I had an apartment I was renting for Airbnb, and then I'd rent that out to be able to like pay living expenses, and then turned it into like the NGO's headquarters and offered volunteers and interns a space to stay in return for working. So a lot of this share economy model, but not because it was cool, but because I didn't have another means of incomes for that. And then finally, the Japanese embassy called me and they're like, hey, crazy girl, we know you've been doing your project for a really long time and we have a grant that's specifically like, you know, really something that you can sue. The UNDP called me as well because it was a joint project between them. And so it was also about like always being there, being on the ground, talking. So I was always trying to extract the data way before we had a data collection team. It was about passion. It was about really coming together and knocking on the doors constantly, not waiting until you have money to knock on the doors, you know. So I think that you're going to be seen in your work, whether it's today or it's tomorrow. And if you're doing it for the purposes of your path of where you're being led to, then however it's meant to happen, it's going to happen. Oftentimes it's not happening how you want it to happen. Oftentimes it's got a lot of delays. And I mean, I've learned to just trust that process and have faith in it.
I have another question from Sandy for you, Joslin. How much interest or momentum has been gained locally for the work that Sustain Lebanon does? I'm thinking along the lines of citizens in Lebanon that were not previously connected to this work before national collapse, deciding to rebuild together.
Okay, so support financially, none. We have a complete donor fatigue for people in Lebanon and for diaspora outside of Lebanon, because the diaspora and the kind of philanthropists of Lebanon have had to completely be run dry because they've been holding the country for the last 4 years. So our city of Beirut blew up by the government, blew us up. So we had no homes, we had a complete renovation to do of all of the city. And at the same time, we had the banking collapse where everyone lost all of their money, generational wealth. So the local or diaspora of the Lebanese, I'm not even touching or asking for their support. Because, yeah, people have no bread. And that's kind of where the crisis management is at the moment, is in relief. And then how are people connecting to the work of Recycle Lebanon? During the revolution, which was the onset of all of the collapse, we had set up 125 or 50-day intervention in the local square, and with 20 tents to kind of show what does system change mean to us. And I think we had kind of garnered a lot of empathy and understanding to what we were trying to do. for support from local or international organizations. I believe like they're really seeing our work, and everyone's waiting for the theropods to kind of collaborate. Yeah.
Yeah.
So every donation, $50, $100 upwards, really helps us to just, get one step forward just as much as we can.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you getting much interest internationally? Like, I mean, obviously you probably have to mostly rely on international support for this. Yeah.
We don't have a lot of donations, no.
No. But is it mostly international though? If it does?
The few donations we have had are international or from, what we tried to do to be creative was to ask our advisory board to ask their friends, and we had like a Zoom call where we were sharing our story of what we did, so to kind of widen the network a bit.
Okay. I think it would be great to have you, and we should maybe like increase the breadth of your story across Australia, really, with all of the groups, these degrowth groups that are now forming. I think, because of this growing movement, I think we need to stay in touch and keep the support for this growing. I think this is so critical. just to support the work you're doing, which is just such I think that we can learn so much from what you're doing, but you're such an example of the tenacity and resilience that is really needed here. And also it's a sort of a case study, as you say, and that I'm pretty sure that's going to, well, it'll either frighten the hell out of people into action, or I think when they hear you talk, it'll make them want to actually act. Yeah. So I really,
been a driver of change.
Yeah. I really want to personally do that. And I'm sure many people here will want to go and talk to their networks and spread the word, and to help you build what you've already started there.
I really appreciate that. It sounds like a new creative way to kind of expand the network too. Thank you.
Yeah. So we're out of time, or we've reached the end of the official, the official time. But if anybody actually wants to stay on and chat a little bit more, I'm not sure if Boon or Joslin, you have time to stay with us, but whatever you feel comfortable with, or if you've got to go, that's fine too. But yeah, the session last night, we just carried on, and if people have to leave, that's fine. Thank you for joining us. It's been incredible to hear your stories. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us.